3、2、1。
Hello everyone, I'm Liu Yuting from Accounting Department. I'm going to introduce question 1. So, the first question is that how can the lockdown of mega city in China influence the aggregate demand in China? So I think that it will shift the aggregate demand curve to the left because households and firms would decrease their consumption on goods and services in Shanghai. So that's the reason why the lockdown of Shanghai would make aggregate demand curve in China shift to the left. So about the question 2, so I'm going to show you the appropriate model about this. So as you can see, this is the aggregate supply and demand curve model. So this is the first. At first, the short-run aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply is so there's a equilibrium at this point at the long-run aggregate supply curve and the short-run aggregate demand. So this is the natural rate of output. So and then the pandemic occurs and the government locked down Shanghai. So the short-run aggregate demand shift to the left. So the short-run points become at this point, the short-run aggregate supply and the short-run aggregate demand. So, and then over time, the short-run aggregate supply changes. So it shifts to the left so that the point of output can come back to the natural rate of output. So that's the changes of the lockdown. And the third question is that what should the policymakers in China do to respond to the short-run economic fluctuation? So I think that the Fed should increase the money supply so that the aggregate demand curve will shift to the right. So this economic fluctuation can be 抵消. And for question 4, is there any similar things that Taiwanese government could do? So I think of the policy of tax cut that 蔡英文推出. So tax cut makes the 可支配所得 of people become more. So the aggregate demand curve just shift to the right. So it can also 抵消 the shift of aggregate demand. So this is my introduction of question 1.
我是7甲的陈木恩，11030563，然后我负责的题目是第2题。So I'm responsible for the second question. And the first one is, what are these sanctions? According to the internet, there are several sanctions. The first one is individual sanctions. There are 1,093 individuals and 80 entities are subjected to an asset freeze and a travel ban. And the second one is economic sanctions. In July and September 2014, the U.S. imposed economic sanctions targeting exchange with Russia in specific economic sectors. The first one is restrict access to EU primary and secondary capital markets for certain Russia banks and companies. And the second one is prohibition on transaction with the Russia Central Bank and the Central Bank of Belarus. And the third one is prohibition on the provision of euro-dominated banknotes to Russia and Belarus. And the fourth one is the prohibition on public financing or investing in Russia. And the fifth one is prohibition on investing in and contribution to project co-financed by the Russia Direct Investment Fund. And there are also diplomatic measures. The EU accepts Russia from many important meetings, and the restrictions on relationship with non-government control areas of these two areas, and I think those two were also one of the Russian pleas. And the next question is, how will they affect inflation in the EU, the real GDP, unemployment, and as those sanctions above? I think that there will be less business activities. So I think that maybe the next export will fall. So the demand curve will shift left, and this is the price level. This is the quantity of output. The demand curve shift left. So the price level falls, and the quantity of output also falls. The unemployment rate will rise. Inflation rate falls. The real GDP falls. In order to solve these problems, I think that they could increase money supply. And how to increase money supply? The first one is sell more bonds to the society and increase the money supply. Oh, geez. No, I'm wrong. Is sell more bonds. Sell more bonds and increase the money supply. And the second one is creating more jobs for the society. And the third one is lower the interest rate. And both these three measures could increase the money supply in the society. And the first one is, do you think that if the EU government can use a single policy to simultaneously solve both inflation and unemployment problems? I think no, they can't, because according to the Philip curve, higher inflation rate causes a lower unemployment rate. So I don't think they can solve these two problems at once.
好，嗨，我是陈宣策，然后我是气管一，学号是1103050994，那我负责是第三题。Okay, so to start with, I'll explain the first question. Please introduce the details of the trade war between USA and China. Okay, so I think China-United States trade war is a war and started from 2018 till now. And why did it start? It's because the former US President Trump, he claimed that China had stolen a lot of property rights and commercial secrets from American companies. So he's angry with that. So he put a lot of tariff on the goods imported from China. And so China is also angry with this. So they do some actions to counter. So they also put extra tariff on the goods imported from America. But in May in 2018, they once had a short truce, and they stopped the trade war for a short period. But later on, America restarted to start the trade war, and then China also started to put a lot of tariff on USA. So until now, until the former US President Trump, he did not elect for the new US president. And the new US President Biden say he will not cancel to put out a tariff on goods from China, but he will have a commercial negotiation with China. Okay, I'm going to explain the second and third question in problem 3. I'll share my computer first. Okay. So I will use this photo to explain the second and the third question. So the question asks me to answer about the change in real interest rate, net capital outflow, real exchange rate, and net export. Okay, I'll divide them into effects to explain. For the first, I want to talk about the tariff. Because of the tariff, so it will be less profitable and harder for USA companies to import goods from China. So the import will decrease and the net export in USA will increase. So as we have learned before, in the real exchange rate market, the demand curve equals the net export. So the demand curve will thus shift from left to right to the D plumb. And the point A will move to B, the new point B. And as we can see, the real exchange rate will increase, which means the USA dollars will appreciate. But because it moves along the same supply curve, so the net export will not be affected. Okay, so let's move on to the second effect about the decreased net capital outflow. As you can see, the decreased net capital outflow will move the point in the net capital outflow graph from N to N plumb. So the net capital outflow will decrease, and the real interest rate on the vertical axis will rise. So we can answer for the first question. The real interest rate will rise, the net capital outflow will decrease. So let's apply this to real exchange rate market. Because of the supply equals the net capital outflow, the decreased net capital outflow will move the supply curve from left and will shift the supply curve from right to the left as plumb. So the new point B will move again to the new point E. So as you can see, the real exchange rate keep rising, which means the US dollar keep rising and appreciating. And because of a decreased supply, the net export will decrease. So we can answer the third question. The real exchange rate will increase and the net export will decrease. And why the net export will decrease is because of the appreciation in US dollars, which will make it better and profitable to import than export. So the import will keep rising due to the appreciation, and export may rise or even fall. And the net export in this graph, as you can see, will definitely decreases. So I want to talk about the third question, whether I agree with Donald Trump or not. I cannot totally agree with him because what he said is not 100% correct. He said that the tariff and the trade war will make USA export better. But yeah, indeed, in the first place, in the beginning, the shift in demand in this demand curve will let the point A to move to the C in the beginning, but then it will soon be offset by the appreciation, by the import increased by the appreciation. So you move to B after a short period. So in the beginning, the net export will increase, and then it will soon move to the original level. And after the decreased net capital outflow effect, the net export was even lower than the original level. So in the end, the net export will decrease. So what Donald Trump said was not 100% correct. So I cannot agree with him.
So, hello, Professor. My name is Yang Jiashen, and my student ID is 1103056, and I'm major in business administration. And today, in my group presentation, I am responsible for question number 4. And so let's look at question number 4. In the past decade, the quantitative easing policy was often used by the Fed in the United States. As a matter of fact, Japan and EU also engaged quantitative easing policies before. So, question 4.1, what is quantitative easing policy? What is the difference between quantitative easing policy and conventional monetary policy? So, in my opinion, quantitative easing policy is often employed during a crisis and when open market operations have failed. When the interest rate may already be at zero, but there is still a slowdown in lending and economic activity. And in such situations, the central bank might buy a variety of securities to revive them. And for example, long-term treasuries, private securities, something like that. Yes. Okay, so, and the difference between quantitative easing policy and conventional monetary policy is using in different situations. And quantitative easing policy buys more asset amounts and higher risk securities. Yes. So question 4.2. Please give one historical example to show how Fed used the quantitative easing policy in response to a crisis or event in the United States. I recall that after the outbreak of the COVID-19 epidemic in 2019, the Fed supplied about 2.3 trillion in lending to support households, employers, financial markets, local governments. So the Fed cut the target federal funds rate to 0% from 0.25% in March 2020 to lower the cost of borrowing on mortgages, auto loans, home equity loans, and other loans. Yes. And furthermore, the Fed purchased massive amounts of securities. Yes, in March 2020, the Fed announced that it would buy at least 500 billion in treasury securities and 200 billion in government guaranteed mortgage-backed securities. Yes. So, question 4.3, use appropriate model to explain how the quantitative easing policy can solve the problem caused by the crisis or event mentioned in question 4.2, and graphical and descriptive analysis are required. So yes, so let me show you my graph. So this is my graph for question 4.3. First, Fed supplied 2.3 trillion in lending to support households, employers, financial markets, and so on, and which use a very low interest rate. A fall in the interest rate, like this, reduce the cost of borrowing, so therefore increase the quantity of loanable funds demand. Okay, so the second one, Fed printed money to purchase massive amounts of securities, which increased the money supply, and money in banks also increase. So buying more bonds caused bond price to increase, however, leaves interest rate decrease. Okay. And so for the third one, quantitative easing policy caused a large amount of increase in money supply in the market leading aggregate demand curve, shifting right and stimulating the market. Therefore, the United States solved the problem caused by the pandemic. Okay, so like this. The aggregate demand curve shift right and stimulate the market. Yes. Okay. So here's my answer for question number 4. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I am Lin Zheyu from Business Administration, and my student ID is 110305005, and I'm responsible for question number 5. Okay, so now I'm answering the question number 1. The European debt crisis began in 2008 with the collapse of Iceland's banking system. They spread primarily to Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain in 2009. It has led to a loss of confidence in European businesses and economies. The crisis was eventually controlled by the financial guarantee of European countries, who fears the collapse of euro and financial contagion, and by the International Monetary Fund. Meanwhile, rating agency downgrades several eurozone country debts. Greece's debt was at one point moved to junk status. Countries receiving bailout funds were required to meet austerity measures designed to slow down the growth of public sector debt as part of the loan agreement. Some of the contributing causes included the financial crisis of 2007 to 2008, the Great Recession of 2008 to 2012, the real estate market crisis, and property bubbles in several countries. The state's fiscal policy regarding government expenses and revenues also contributed. By the end of 2009, the peripheral Eurozone member states of Greece, Spain, Ireland, Portugal, and Cyprus were unable to repay or refinance their government debts or bail out their beleaguered bank without assistance of third-party financial institutions. These include the European Central Bank, ECB, the IMF, and eventually the European Financial Stability Facility, EFSF. Also in 2009, Greece revealed that its previous government had greatly underreported its budget deficit, signifying a violation of EU policy and spurring fears of a euro collapse via political and financial contagion. 17 Eurozone countries voted to create EFSF, which stands for European Financial Stability Facility, in 2010, specifically to address and assist with the crisis. The European sovereign debt crisis peaked between 2010 and 2012. With increasing fear of excessive sovereign debts, lenders demand higher interest rate from Eurozone states in 2010, with high debts and deficit level making it harder for these countries to finance their budget deficits when they were faced with overall low economic growth. Some affected countries raised taxes and slashed expenditure to combat the crisis, which contribute to social upset within their border and a crisis of confidence in leadership, particularly in Greece. Several of these countries, including Greece, Portugal, and Ireland, had their sovereign debts downgraded to junk status by international credit rating agency during this crisis, worsened investors' fear. Okay guys, so now I'm gonna solve the question number 2, and I'm gonna show you the graph now. Okay guys, so now these are the 3 graphs that I prepared to answer this question. So it starts from this graph. Because of the European sovereign debt crisis, so the investor withdraw their capital from the loanable fund market. So it makes the loanable fund demand shift from D1 to D2 and cause the real interest rate decrease from A to B. So as for NCO, the second graph, because of the real interest rate decrease, so NCO increased from A to B. It shift along NCO curve. And it comes to the third graph. The third graph is about real exchange rate. So because of NCO shift from A to B, and it makes in dollar supply, it increased from S1 to S2 and caused the real exchange rate to change from point A to point B, which means real exchange rate decrease. So let's see the outcome over here. The real interest rate decrease. The NCO increase. The real exchange rate decrease. Net export, because of the real exchange rate decrease, so it caused net export to increase. Okay, so now I'm responsible for question number 3. The reason why this country in EU that export a lot is taking advantage of this time's crisis is because this crisis caused the real exchange rate to decrease, which makes their currency to depreciate. And in international trade, when a country depreciates, it increased the power of export. So this crisis makes these countries to export more. So which makes these country that has a majority of export taking advantage of this time's crisis.